much, Brother Gary. Appreciate the good job Brother Gary does, don't you? It's a blessing. Well, good to have each and every one of you here today. We've got a special guest with us, Brother Clifford McGee. In fact, it works out well. Brother Raspberry's not feeling well. He was obviously scheduled to teach along the way. Doing a fantastic job. I look forward to Sunday school and learning and growing and going through the book of Genesis with him. But anyways, Brother McGee is going to be here preaching tonight and was available to teach this morning. So they were missionaries, first of all, he and Miss Naoma. They were missionaries in South Korea for 12 years. In fact, that was during the time Brother Bert Harrison was pastor. So it goes all the way there. And then they came back from there due to visa issues and not be able to get back into the country. In 1990, they went to Ecuador and have been there for the last 34 years now, going on 35 years. They served there. Their son Glenn and daughter Sherry have been there since about 1992, working together, laboring together. And so I'm excited we get to hear from this veteran missionary. And what we're going to do is we're going to watch the video. He wanted to show that here this morning so you'd have a point of reference. So you're going to watch it twice. Is that going to hurt anybody? You're going to see it tonight. You'll see it this morning. So let's watch the video. And then, Brother McGee, we sure look forward to you teaching here this morning.
Thank you for your involvement in our ministry. We first came to your church, and if my memory serves me correctly, you became involved in our ministry in 1967, or perhaps the spring of 1968. So we've been partners for a long time in a lot of places, both in South Korea and in Ecuador. If I could pause for 30 seconds for a commercial before we get into the Bible study this morning. I would like for you to pray about a need that we have for a young couple to come to Ecuador and help administer our youth camp ministry, which is growing quite well. We're almost finished with the construction on the camp, and we need a young couple to come down and help in the administration of the camp, be involved in the Bible Institute in a teaching ministry, and also to be involved in our outreach to the towns and the villages that surround the city of Tena, the area where we live and work down at the edge of the jungle. So if you'd pray about that, we need some help, and we're hoping that God will send us a couple perhaps out of Southwest that will come down and work with us for that time. But I have a question for you this morning. Have you ever come to the point in your life when you felt like, or perhaps feel like, that you have reached the end of your rope? That you've done everything that you could do, your strength is gone. There's just not much anticipation for tomorrow. Just don't know how you're going to put one foot in front of the other one. And life has become so exceedingly difficult that you don't know what you're going to do. I came to that point in my life, our second year in South Korea. We arrived there in June of 1968 and immediately enrolled in Yonsei University in their Department of Language to try to learn that very, very strange language. We studied 5, 6, 7 hours a day, 5 days a week for a year. And at the end of that time, I just could not get it. I couldn't understand the structure of the sentences. The words were difficult. I was struggling. And for the first time in my life, I felt like that I might not make it. I might not be able to complete the goal. A year at the end of that first year of language school, one of our missionaries went home on furlough and left a young church that he had started in an area called Dong, and left that church under the care of a young man by the name of Oh Myung Do. He went home for a year's furlough, hoping and trusting that God would guide this young man to lead that church to grow. But the opposite happened. There was immorality, licentiousness happening in the back rooms of the building. And Brother O, a young man, simply did not know how to confront it. He did the best that he could, but he ended up in the hospital. I went over there that summer to see if I could salvage that work. I met for almost 3 hours with those people, trying to reclaim that which belonged to God. And every time I opened my mouth, they laughed, and they made fun, and they jeered. I did the best that I could with what I had for about 3 hours, but I left there feeling about as low as a man can ever feel. On the way home, in the depths of despair, I saw a little barber shop, and I thought, I'll go in and get a haircut, and that'll help me feel better. So I went into the little barber shop. There were 3 barber chairs and about 5 or 6 straight back chairs sitting there, and it was full. And when I stepped into that little barber shop, they were just talking a mile a minute, everybody. But the minute I stepped in the door, everything went quiet. The foreigner had come into their presence. Foreigners are different. I was different. I don't know whether you've noticed it or not, but Orientals have very little bridge to their nose. And when they see a nose like mine, the little kids used to gather around and run backwards in front of me, pointing and shouting, "Kojangi, Kojangi, nose demonstrator, nose demonstrator," and just laugh with glee. But everything went silent when I stepped in. Just about that time, the man in the last chair was finished with his haircut. He stepped down and started to leave. And out of deference to the foreigner, they indicated to me to take the chair. I went over, sat down, and they put the cloth over my shoulders and so, and I was hope against hope that they would start talking again. But they did not. They just sat there in silence, waiting for me to speak. And the Lord knows I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't even want to talk to him. But I had to do what missionaries do. I knew I had to tell him about the Lord. So I started talking about the sacrifice of Christ. And they were polite. They put their hands over their mouths so that I could not see them smiling. But I could see their eyes were dancing, their shoulders were shaking. That was the longest haircut in the world. And I struggled through that presentation of the gospel for that young man. I paid. I went out into the dirty street. There were open sewers back in those days, and the stench filled the air in your nostrils. And I was standing out in that dirt street, crying like a baby, and saying, God, why can't I go home? Why can't I go home? Back there, I can at least I'm a functional human being. I can buy, I can sell, I can lead people to Christ. But here, there wasn't a snotty-nosed kid on the street that couldn't talk better than I could. And I said, God, why can't I go home? But he knew something that I had not yet learned. You can always do more than you think you can do. You can always do more than you think you can do. In the book of 1 Kings, chapter number 20, Elijah has stood before the prophets of Baal. There were 450 prophets of Baal, and the 400 prophets that ate at the queen's table, 850 enemy prophets were standing there before him. A great crowd was amassed around. And he looked at the people and he said, if God be God, serve him. If Baal be Baal, serve him. But the people answered him not a word. And there alone, surrounded by 850 enemies and a great multitude of people that didn't care enough to open their mouths, he stood alone to face the greatest challenge of his life. The prophets of Baal, the prophets of the queen's court, put the rocks in their place. They laid the wood in place. They offered the sacrifice, and they began to pray that their God would send fire down and consume that sacrifice and prove that he was indeed God. They prayed and they cried. And when nothing worked, as the afternoon grew longer, they began to cut their bodies. They began to jump up on the sacrifice themselves, offering their bodies if perchance their God would hear, and he would send down the fire. But he did not. And then it came Elijah's turn, and he prepared his altar. He soaked it down with water, and then he prayed. I think it was about 86 words. He prayed. And the fire came down from heaven and consumed the sacrifice. It had not rained for 3.5 years. And so he prayed a second time, and the heavens opened after that long, long drought, and the waters came down. It had been a very long and exhausting day. And I can imagine how he felt after standing alone so long that day in front of such a great multitude of opposition. But he has seen the fire and he has seen the water. It had been a great day. But chapter number 19 says, and Ahab told Jezebel. Ahab told Jezebel. Jezebel sent a messenger to the prophet and said, Lord, the Lord do more to me also, and more. If you're not like them by this time tomorrow, I'm going to kill you. You're going to pay for what you've done. And after that tremendous victory in his life, he got up and he ran till his legs would carry him no further. He sat down under a juniper tree and he said, Lord, let me die. He had reached the end of his rope. He had done his best, but he just didn't have any more to do with. You ever felt like that? But it's interesting that when he's sitting there under that tree wanting to die, that God did not let him do so. Neither did God criticize him. He said, you rest and you eat. And you rest and you eat. Because you got a journey ahead of you. You're going to leave here. You're going to go to the Mount of God. And then you're going to do three things. You're going to anoint the next king for two countries. But before you anoint the king of this country and the king of that country, you're going to find your successor. Excuse me. You're going to train him, and you're going to leave him in such shape that he's going to do twice as much as you've ever done. Between the time of the sitting under the juniper tree and the catching away in the fiery chariot to heaven was a lapse of probably about 10 years. 10 years of very, very fruitful ministry, and 10 years of leaving behind a protege who would do twice as much as he had done before. I say that to say this. When life becomes its most difficult and you just don't have the strength to do any more, you don't see how you can put that next foot in front of the other one. It may be financial. It may be spiritual. It may be in your relationship. Maybe in your business, whatever it is. But when you come to that point, when you just don't see how you can put another foot in front of the other one, you remember you can always do more than you think you can do. You can always do more. I would share a second thought with you, and that thought is this: that your giving is going to have a greater impact than you can ever imagine. We give, and we give, and we give again. Used to be that the offering plates passed by all of the time, and now a lot of people give online. But it doesn't make much difference whether you click on the computer and make that contribution to the work of God, or whether you put it in the offering plate. As soon as you click the button, or as soon as you drop that offering in the plate, that's the last you're going to see of that money. It goes somewhere back here in some office and gets tallied up, and they give you a good accounting of it at the end of the year. But you have given, and you have given, and you have heard the pastor, you've heard the missionaries, you've sacrificed and given again. And sometimes we wonder, what impact am I really having? What is that really doing somewhere around the world? What is happening? If I could go back to Korea, and I think the pastor mentioned it, we were in Korea for 12 years and had some health problems, came home, had some visa problems, couldn't get back into Korea, so we ended up going down to Ecuador. But let's go back to Korea for a few moments. That first year, that language school was like torture for me. It was like living over on the edge of Hades. But the second year, that language opened up to me. I could hear it, I could speak it, and it was time to start our first church. I had asked God to give me some young men with whom I could work, and He did. And we went down to the city of Taejeon, about 250,000 people, kind of a country atmosphere. We rented a building in the southeast corner of that town. Wasn't anything out there but the Buddhists. But we rented a building. It was 15 feet wide and 45 feet long. No windows, holes in the slate roof, but it was the only thing that we could find, so we rented it. And we repaired it, knocked some holes in the wall, painted it as white as we could paint, and we started the church. Started going up and down the little narrow alleyways made by the mud walls that surround every home. And they came to hear about a God who really loved them. And they came. We went over 200 on our first anniversary. I came back and I was preaching in some churches. And I was in South Austin Baptist Church, Austin, Texas. And the pastor came up to me just before Sunday school and said, would you go back and talk with the little kids? They'd like to see you. And I said, sure. So I went back there during the Sunday school hour, a bunch of little ones about that high. And we talked for a little while. At the end of that Sunday school hour, the teacher said they have something to give you. And a little boy and a little girl came to the front, and each one had a little sack, a little Bull Durham tobacco sack. Some of you older ones may remember that. You could buy a sack of Bull Durham for 6 cents, and you could get a package of cigarette papers to roll it with for, I think, 2 cents or a penny. But they had 2 little sacks, one each, and they were filled with coins on little tobacco sacks. And they came up there, and I knelt down, and they handed me the sacks, and they said, missionary, take this to Korea and buy a church. Now, you don't buy much of a church with 2 sacks of coins. But I thanked them, gave them a hug, got up and went back to the auditorium. When I was preaching that morning, I told that congregation, your kids just made the down payment on a piece of land. Are you going to help them? You going to help them? Went back to Ecuador and bought an old soap factory that was right next door to the building we were renting. Remodeled it. Our second anniversary, we had 440 something. Our third anniversary, 716. Our fourth anniversary, we went over 1,000. Tell me that your giving does not have an impact. Your giving has a greater impact than you can ever imagine. I would give you a third thought before time runs out, and that is that your sacrifice will never, never, never be forgotten. We know the scripture that if you give as much as a cup of water to drink in my name, you're not going to lose your reward. Ray Boltz wrote a song a number of years ago. I'm sure you're familiar with it. And it said, thank you for giving to the Lord. I am a life that was changed. Thank you for giving to the Lord. I am so glad that you gave. We know that. We know that. But can we really sense the depth of what it's like for someone to approach us time and time again and say, thank you for loving me? One year, we were one of my missionaries' friends in the city of Tejan, where we started our first church. He needed to go home on furlough. He asked me to watch over his church while he was gone. It was in a half basement and on a 5-way intersection, kind of a roundabout. And so I said, sure, I'll take care of it. Took one of my men with me, and we went over there. We watched over that church for a year. And before every service, as our custom was, excuse me, you have to remember that South Korea is a tiny peninsula of land, about 125 miles wide, 225 miles long, with 40 million people. 90% is mountainous. It's a compaction of people like it's hard for us to understand. So what we did was before every service, we would get there early, get us a handful of tracts, go out to the street, and everybody that passed by just hand them a tract and say, would you come in and hear about a God who really loves you? Would you come in and hear? And many of them turned in. And they'd come and hear, and they'd get saved. But that particular service, I was out handing out tracts with the other guys like that, and I saw this guy coming down one of the streets, coming down a hill on his bicycle. Not typical of the Koreans. They're very clean people. But he evidently had a really tough day that day, because his hands were black, his shirt was stained, his hair was messed up. He was just dirty from a hard day's work. But he stopped. And he took the tract. And I said, come on in. Hear about a God who really loves you. And surprisingly, he parked his bike. He came in, he sat down back there, and he listened about a God who really loves him. The invitation was given. He came to the front. We talked to him, opened the Bible, showed him how to get saved. He never said a word. He never said a word. I'm not sure he was ever convinced, even though I did the preaching. I'm not sure he understood that I could speak Korean. But he never said a word to me. He just got up and he went away. And so I wondered, but that's all you can do. But the next night service, we were out there handing out tracts again, and here came this guy on his bicycle coming from another street, another direction. And he evidently had gotten off work a little early and gone home and scrubbed his face. It was red and ruddy, and his hands and his white shirt was as clean and ironed as you can imagine. And here he came riding back to church for the second time in his life. But what really thrilled me was there on the back, that rack on the back of his bicycle, and that's what they used to carry cargo on. Now, back in those days, they were work bicycles. And there on the rack on the back of his bicycle was his very, very pregnant wife. I mean, she was as big as a barrel. And here he comes pedaling her to church so that she can hear what he heard. And she did. After the services were over, the people were filing out. I was back at the back. We bowed to one another, to the women, to the men. We bow and then we shake. And as we shook hands, he never said a word. But I felt something pressed into the palm of my hand. Did not know what it was, but I thought I'd put it in my pocket and I'll see what it is later. And the people went out into the night. After he was gone, the people were gone, I reached in my pocket to see what it might be. And there I pulled out, not this one, but I pulled out a single stick of chewing gum. Now, chewing gum wasn't expensive back in those days, but it was expensive enough that they sold it one stick at a time. And somehow or the other, he had stopped by the store, picked up a piece of chewing gum, and pressed it into the palm of my hand. I stayed at that church almost a year. Every night, he was there. His wife got saved. She was there when she could. But what amazed me was that every night after the service, as he went out, he bowed, we shook hands, and he pressed a piece of chewing gum into my hand. You know what he was saying with that piece of chewing gum? Saying with words that he could not form. He was saying, thank you for loving me. Thank you for caring. Now, I don't suppose that there's going to be any chewing gum in heaven. But if there were, I have an idea, there'd be a lot of people wanting to come up and shake your hand and say thank you for giving to the Lord. I am a life that was changed. Thank you for giving to the Lord. I'm glad you gave. Thank you for loving and caring for me. Beloved, we can always do more than we think we can. Our giving has a greater impact than we could possibly imagine. And our sacrifice for God will never, never, never be forgiven. Forgotten, I'm sorry, not forgiven, but never be forgotten. I would encourage you, this is a great mission church. If you're not involved, I would encourage you, get involved. And not just a token involvement, but get involved and see what God can do in your life. Because you can do more than you think you can do. Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Father, we come into your presence to thank you for the opportunity we've had to be with these dear folk. And here at Southwest, I want to thank you for their gratitude and their faithfulness down through the years. And Father, I'd ask you to bless the comments that we've made, that it'll be a blessing and encouragement to each one. And help us, Father, not to look at the weakness of our abilities, but to see what you can do through us, the great challenge that lies before us. Help us, Father, to use the rest of our lives to do more than we ever thought possible, in anticipation of that day when we'll get to see the effect of our giving. We'll get to see the effect of our work. And we'll get to rejoice around the throne forever with those whose lives were changed because we got involved. Bless us and help us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Okay, I think we have a... Okay, Pastor.
Well, you thank God for the lesson here this morning and challenge. You know, here we are just a couple months away from our missions conference. Great challenge. Great challenge. Very thankful for that. We'll transition between Sunday school and church, so we got about 12 minutes or so.